We create a lot of text. And to find out just how much text I generate, I installed the tracker on the laptop. And during just 8 months of usage, I have made more than 1.8 million keystrokes. The average word in English language is 4.7 letters long, meaning that I have by approximation typed out 380,000 words during this period. And considering that I deal with visual communication primarily in my daily work, this was a quite surprising find. We form documents, reports, stories, love notes, and shopping lists through letters, which then form words, which then form sentences that convey information and meaning. Typography has been concealed as it is rightfully not in the center of attention, rather a carrying medium, a vessel, if you will. It's important to look at a single letter because that sublime medium determines how the content is transmitted and perceived. If we look at a typographic structure from a technical standpoint, we notice an anthropological vocabulary being used for some elements. A letter can have an arm, a neck, an ear, a leg, a spine, a shoulder, and not only that we recognize these physical attributes in typography, but we also assign feelings and character traits to it. We started assigning personality traits to typography very early. The Gothic letter that you see is known as black letter and is used in Western Europe from 12th to 17th century. Characterized by thick strokes, it was considered barbaric by Renaissance humanists. For fancy Italians, these letters were un-Roman, primitive, not just because of their heavy looks, but also for political reasons. They were culturally tied to their 6th century aggressors. Technological development in just last 40 years has provided us with tools that made it so easy and amazingly fast to produce new letter forms in digital environment. In 2019, a service called What Font Is cataloged more than 500,000 fonts. Today, that number is at staggering 770,000 fonts, both in commercial and non-commercial space, showing that font availability is greater than ever and is steadily continuing to grow. So the question that rose was, what is an appropriate typography? I wanted to examine how corporate typography is perceived by people outside of the brand's context. So I have made a selection of 10 famous brand logos chosen from a range of industries. And after I have identified the typography for each of them, they were presented in a neutral form that you see now on the screen. It was stripped from any brand recognizable visual artifacts like colors, titles, and so forth. And then they were compared against a series of qualitative descriptors to see if their form really matches their industry and values that they wanted to convey. Survey was conducted on a sample of 60 participants, out of which 93% works in the creative field, dealing with typography in one way or another. I was particularly interested in this target group as they're often decision makers in visual identity development, primarily in the development of logotypes. In the first stage, each participant was given 10 neutralized logotypes and 7 keywords. They were asked to grade on how they thought this particular typography is appropriate in connection to a distinctive keyword. They did not know which brand they were grading or if this was any particular brand in question at all. You can see, for example, that the typography used by Mercedes-Benz scored low overall and the lowest on the keyword automotive. On the other hand, Netflix had an overall good score, with appropriateness rating being the highest for the keyword movie. The typography used by WordPress was deemed appropriate for words like publishing and free, but scored very poorly for technology and software. The New York Times typography had the best single score, as it was deemed very appropriate for news segment. 63% of people gave high and very high appropriateness rating for this. You can also see that they scored badly for the word fast, with 85% of people giving low and very low appropriateness rating. This was the worst single keyword rating result in the whole research. Overall, Ford's typography was rated worst on the appropriateness scales if we take into consideration these 7 keywords. Interestingly, Lufthansa's typography was overall rated best on the appropriateness scale for these keywords. They use Helvetica, which can be characterized as a global and neutral typeface. I have written more about these 2 attributes in the report. This typography is easy to identify because it is simply stripped of any visual characteristic that can suggest a strong personality. Rather, its personality is decided by the viewer. And many companies use it for the same reason. Work that was developed during the research stage was twofold. I had developed a mock typography for each of these brands that was almost a caricature. Its purpose was to show the viewer and to shock the viewer and contrast the keywords. It was supposed to be inappropriate on many levels. Alongside those, I had developed 2 alternative logotypes for each brand that had a goal to represent the keywords in the best way. In the second stage of research, same participants were asked to choose the most appropriate logotype that will best represent a whole set of keywords. And this was the same set of keywords as shown in the stage 1. For each brand, they were presented with 4 choices. They were offered original brand typography, 1 mock version, and 2 alternative options. The choices were then randomized within each question to prevent creation of any patterns that they could recognize. Both Ford and WordPress scored the lowest, with only 15% of participants choosing their current typography as the most appropriate one. In 6 out of 10 questions, none of the 60 participants chose the mock typography as appropriate. 2 participants reported they were not able to proceed with the question as they were upset with the presented choice. One of them even said that this particular font should be outlawed. Overall, the study has shown that participants on average deemed alternative typography as more appropriate than the original one. If we are to translate these findings into visual cues, we would get completely different brand images. Only Duolingo and Netflix would keep the same typeface as a distinguished mark for their brand identity. And the work outcome for WordPress looks like this. Dolce & Gabbana is transformed into a serif logotype. Quora, on the other hand, is translated into sans serif logotype. And the most drastic intervention is done on Ford. In the application, it will look somewhat like this, and also like this. This journey has been very interesting for me. It has kept me engaged and amused at times. I found that we subconsciously do recognize, assign, and also absorb typographic personality along with the meaning of the text. And brands can and need to leverage typography to establish a better connection between the form in their logotypes and the personality they want to evoke with their target groups. And they can do that through a series of formative tests like the one that I have made. We are now at the pinnacle of brand refreshment, especially in the automotive industry that you had a chance to see in the past couple of days. And we are to see more of that in the future. Hopefully the foundations they pour are going to hold their brand image well for the next decade or so. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention.